Serious violence, student indiscipline, no regard for authority, students peddling drugs and smuggling guns and ammunition into the school compound. According to tutor in an interview with I-95.5 FM, this has been the reality at the Chaguanas North Secondary for over a year. Mr. Sinanan attributes part of the problem to two rival gangs in the area with which students are involved. He says Friday's situation where Defense Force personnel had to be called in after a foil plot in which gang members are said to have acquired school uniforms in a plan to kill a teacher and students came on the heels of a violent attack involving two students on Monday. Mr. Sinanan says the police have not been properly treating with the issue.
I was very, very surprised when the school principal and the teachers were telling me that the assistance that they are seeking and the cooperation and support they are seeking from the Chaguanas police is not forthcoming for whatever very good reason.
He says the problem is further exacerbated by the lack of security personnel on the school compound, a facet of a decision taken by the former People's Partnership government to reduce the number of security guards in schools across the country.
Chaguanas North Secondary, their security complement was reduced by half, by 50%. So right now they have what we call 1 by 3. That is 1 corporal, 3 constables.
But as one of the largest schools in the country with 800 plus students and more than 100 teachers, Mr. Sinanan says there are problems to patrol the compound, resulting in regular security breaches, such as intruders jumping the fence and unwanted paraphernalia coming onto the premises. He believes these problems are rooted in societal ills fostered by the very educational system, which he feels contributes to crime. He says the country is still operating from a colonial academic process meant to produce workers and not critical thinkers. According to the tutor head, the various examinations in which he says turn out more than a 50% fail rate help create a society which strays from equity.
When you have students in such large numbers coming through your school system and being certified as failures, then you retard and you impede the capacity of the country for economic growth. All right? Of course, many of them become a burden to the state. You have to incarcerate them.
He says there has to be an overhauling of the system. But so far, from the national education consultations which he's been attending, the last of which will take place at the Magdalena Grand Resort in Tobago on Monday, he says he has not seen or heard any out-of-the-box, earth-shattering ideas along these lines. Alicia Boucher, TV6 News.
6:22.5 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, we're going to chat in the next few minutes with a couple of personalities. We have on Skype attorney at law Martin George, who in a few minutes we'll ask to give his perspective on maybe the legal issues as to whether or not anti-gang legislation comes into the mix in this entire matter. But before we talk to Mr. George, maybe it's appropriate we speak to the head of the National PTA, Zina Ramatali, via the phone line, because she is in Tobago for the last of these consultations being hosted by the Ministry of Education. Good morning, Ms. Ramatali.
Good morning, Fazir, and to Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning to you. Ms. Ramatali, you would have heard a bit of a report that we just aired. You would have been involved in previous consultations. You would have had your input, and we all know your views very, very clearly in relation to the issues surrounding school violence. But given what we've just heard from Mr. Sinanan about him not being particularly encouraged from the dialogue, with the greatest respect to you being part of the process, for example, today at Magdalena Grand, isn't all of this a waste of time?
Well, certainly, I wouldn't say Fazir is a waste of time, because I think too many issues have been on the front burner. At times, we tend to have a lot of talk shop, and I said that at the first consultation, that I hope that the discussions and the ideas, the suggestions coming out of this consultation actually would bear fruit, because, we have been part of consultations in the past, and we have not seen the reviews and what came out of it. So I'm hoping that this consultation would be one of a difference, and that the suggestions that are being made, and well, actually I didn't stay again in Tobago. We were there training our PTA officers, and I want to bring to the fore that unfortunately I couldn't stay, but one of the issues, and I'm sorry that I couldn't stay to raise the issues that parents of Tobago raised, and that will come into the fore the issue of students being engaged and supervised. And parents of some secondary schools in Tobago indicated that for the month, just for 1 month, children had 26 and 33 free periods. And we are saying that that is recipe for chaos. But dealing with this problem here in Chaguanas, we are calling for an audit of what is happening at that school. And not only that school, but all government schools that have similar problems of indiscipline and violence. We want an audit of all those government schools as to why this indiscipline and violence is taking place. One particular point that Mr. Sinanan raised, I think it was in the print media, is that the teachers were afraid to go to certain areas of the school. And we are saying as a parent-teacher association, that should not be so. Then something is wrong, because teachers not supposed to be afraid to go to class, to whatever class or certain areas. I know that school is a very large school, and I have been to meetings at that school in the night time, and I mean, I myself was scared. So I agree with him that we need a full complement of security officers, but also we need the assessment of what is going on with the children. We want to know if they are engaged, if they are in classrooms, the attendance of teachers. Those are some things we want. We want to find out what kind of support is needed, right, for teachers. We need an assessment of the children. We would like to know if they are on drugs, if they are on alcohol, if they are bringing drugs in the school. We need to know something like that, and we cannot afford to continue when something like this. It is very sad, because we could have had, so many people lost their lives, teachers and students, innocent people.
Indeed, Ms. Ramsdale, just hold the line for a moment, because I'm going to ask you to come back and just to tell me, what do you think? Have you seen or heard anything in the consultation so far that makes you feel it's going to be any different? But before we get to that, let's bring in Martin George, attorney at law, the gentleman who stopped me from watching morning television for about a month after I heard him talk about the issue with Orville London and his failure to release the details of the medical investigation just a few weeks ago. And it's staggering that these things continue to happen in Trinidad and Tobago. But Mr. George, in relation to the issues of gang violence and the existing legislation, can anything be done in the case of, for example, of the Chaguanas North Secondary to deal with it from a policing, national security manner in that area?
Good morning, Fazir, and good morning to your viewers, and good morning, Mr. Ramtahali. Fazir, in relation to the existing legislation, you would recall that there are certain specific requirements that one must establish first and foremost before you can even charge someone with being a member of a gang. You have to establish that there is in existence this specific gang, and that there is some way of identifying the members to know who is a member. And the question, I think, would be the evidence to prove this. That may be the challenge there. But there's a flip side to this whole scenario, Fazir, and I just want to bring the nation's attention for us to recall, because, we are a nation that sometimes forgets things. You'll recall some years ago, the international school shooting. Remember, there's a student who was there at that school who came into the school with his father's firearm and proceeded to shoot a security guard, and then he went upstairs. He fired shots in the cafeteria. Then he went upstairs. He held some of the students and teachers hostage. There was a standoff. The police were called in, and there was a shootout at the international school in Port of Spain, in Westmoreland. So we need to understand that these are things that have a bearing in reality in our history in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's not something to be taken lightly. And furthermore, the flip side to this whole scenario is that in that circumstance, after the police eventually shot and killed this young man, the police officers themselves ended up facing charges whereby there was an inquiry as to whether they should now be charged for using excessive force and causing the death of this young man. And his parents hired private prosecutors to prosecute this matter against the police. So when you have this scenario of, from what I understand, happened last week, where an army officer volunteered, and I mean well-meaning as he may have been, I think there's also the question of jurisdiction and authority to be considered as to whether an army officer, I can understand a police officer clearly having jurisdiction, but an army officer, I am not sure has any locus or jurisdiction whatsoever in a matter such as that.
I understand what you're saying, Mr. George, but as many in the nation will be saying, you know, well, what is the point of all of this dialogue and so on, and you're giving us the important precedent, the issue of the international school shooting, and quite correct, you point out that we tend to forget a lot of these things after 9 days, but what do we do if you're saying basically gathering evidence alone just to prove the existence of a gang, to prove that someone is a member of a gang, to prove this, to prove that, to prove the other, isn't that essentially saying that our hands are tied and we can't do anything?
Well, I think, Fuzzy, what we need to really look at maybe is some sort of dedicated and specialized schools security unit. Now, of course, it would mean a whole scenario where either the MTS is revamped and revived to ensure that they are given some kind of specialized training whereby they are able to maybe elicit information from students who can, you know, give them in a confidential manner without being revealed, you know, in terms of their identity. So we have to really take a new look at this, because I'll tell you, Fazil, this scenario is one which we are going to see repeated more and more. And, you know, we are a copycat nation. So when we see things happening abroad, you know, when you see like the Sandy Hook shooting, elementary school shooting, and stuff like that, people tend to mirror and copycat things that they see. So the point is, we have to expect that sooner or later, that type of scenario is going to hit our shores, you know, in greater frequency. So therefore, we must be prepared for it.
Mr. George, just hold on Skype with us as we'll now revert to, back to Mr. Ramatali, the head of the NPTA, who has been part of the earlier dialogues, not in Tobago, for this final consultation. But Mr. Ramatali, just let me repeat the question that I posed to you before we spoke to Mr. George. What evidence is there? What makes you feel that these consultations will be any different from what we've had previously?
Well, these consultations, actually, it is not like what we had before. This consultation, we had various topics, and office members of the public and educators, we registered and we went to different rooms. So you had an opportunity in there to make your contributions. For about 5 minutes, nobody stopped you, and you had your rapporteurs and so writing. And I know all is going to be collated. And at the end of the day, as the major stakeholders in education, we would be able to say, yes, we agree with this recommendation, yes or no. So to me, and I'm being honest here, this dialogue that we had is much better than what we had in previous years, because it was more engaging. Now, I've only been to Port of Spain, and I sent an officer to San Fernando, and an officer is in Tobago, from Tobago's region. So after that, we are going to, as a national association, because we have already put together our written submissions that we are going to send to the Ministry of Education. Time wouldn't permit me, you know, to give some of what we have here, but certainly in discipline and violence is one. And what we are seeing ever so often, and this is for over a decade, more than 2 decades, we have been speaking about indiscipline and violence in schools. But we have to take the bull by its horn, and we have to say zero tolerance to indiscipline, violence, bullying. And we have been recommending going to Ohio with the Ministry of Education in 2011, somewhere around there, that we have a national anti-bullying policy for all our schools. And we have the National Code of Conduct, which is supposed to be implemented and carried out. And somehow that code of conduct, I don't know where it is, and I'm hoping that it could be revised and we could also look at it. Now, if it is that the students are on the compound and they are not engaged, and I'm saying that again, because besides the security, the children have to be taught. And if they are not taught, and we are saying coming from primary school, the children should come with their an assessment to the cumulative record cards. What is the issues with these children? If they have behavior problems, how we could modify the problems, constant assessment of that, constant communication with the parent, including that we have, parents welcoming at the school, because many administrators, and I could say that here this morning once again, do not want PTAs in the schools. So we have to be more engaging, and as stakeholders, we have to come up with solutions that will fit everyone and that the children and the teachers could be comfortable with.
Mr. Ramatali, thanks for your perspective. Let's bring in Martin George once again via Skype for a final point of view, Mr. George, in relation to what we are discussing. How hopeful are you that anything meaningful will come out of this?
Be solutions based, and one of the things that I could definitely suggest and offer to the nation, as a director of Crime Stoppers, we have a dedicated youth Crime Stoppers program which is supposed to be targeting schools. And for today, I am going to call and make a recommendation to my board of directors that we ramp up our program and have it targeting specifically for the students to be able to call in confidentially with information concerning gangs and gang members that may be in their schools. It's anonymous, it's safe, it's secure, and we've been running this program for several years in Trinidad and Tobago successfully, and I think that this may be a way to help. It's a toll-free number, so the students wouldn't have to pay for the call, and as I say, they can do so anonymously. So at least that is one solution that I can suggest and offer to the nation, first to try to get the information so that the bad eggs in the schools, and it's not all of the students are bad, it's just a few who are giving all the schools a bad name by their actions. So if those students can be identified, and clearly the other students will know what these ones are up to. If they can call into Crime Stoppers, the youth program, and give that information, that way we can pass it on to the police officers, who may then be able to take proactive steps rather than simply knee-jerk reactions, as we've seen in this case.
Attorney at Law Martin George, thanks very much for taking the time to give us your perspective. And earlier, Zina Ramatali, the head of the National Parent-Teacher Association, and again, on a Monday morning, talking about road fatalities, talking about violence in schools, talking about indiscipline, talking about consultation. It just makes you feel something you want to switch off. Not everyone is switch off, but as I was explaining to just now when introducing Martin, when I heard him explain the circumstances and the situation as to where the head of the THA over London refuses to reveal the nature and the details of the report concerning the death of the lady when she was having the child, I think it was Old Year's night into New Year's, and the refusal to release the details of that report. Just one of those many taxpayer-funded reports and inquiries and so on that public officials paid by taxpayers refuse to release and are under no real pressure to release it. You wonder what's the point of all this dialogue. But let's try and pretend to be optimistic, shall we? We'll take a break and come back right after this.